Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, my little stream where I go through your top voted questions from PollGab. I'm pointing, I think, at the right direction, pollgab.com/room/Brento, and answer those. Hello, David Rebo. Hello, SQL Dev DBA. Good to see y'all. I think today is going to be the day where I put in an order for a different ceiling fan. This ceiling fan came in this bedroom when we bought the house, and it is the most grandma looking. It used to be worse. There used to be like flowery glass shields over these light bulbs, and so I just got to switch to like a real clean, high. I don't need it to be dropping down this low. Something that's real flush to the ceiling. Doesn't look quite so grandma. I suppose I could zoom in a little bit, and that'll kind of take away a little bit of the grandma there. That's probably good. Oh yeah, that's not so bad at all. Yeah, well, now nobody knows that I'm a grandma back there. So I'll tell you a funny story there about the Anthony Bourdain. Every now and then somebody will be like, who is that over there in the corner? So it's Anthony Bourdain flipping folks off. It's a painting by Cassie Ott, and I totally love that painting. But I'll tell you a story. So once I was going to do a webcast for a company, and they wanted this camera angle of me, and instead of the usual like head on from my computer, so we get all set up to go. We're about 15 minutes before the webcast starts. And they said, okay, also we just need you to remove that painting down from the wall. And I'm like, I don't really want to, but totally I get it. And I go to pull it off. I couldn't pull it off from the wall. I had put it on. I don't know how the heck I put this thing on there. It has something to do with 3M command strips, but I was tugging on that thing. I was yanking on it as hard as I could, like trying not to damage the painting. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I don't have a way to get that off quickly and cleanly. And I'm worried that I'm going to damage the painting. So one of these days, whenever we sell the house, I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to have to figure out how to pull that off. I'm going to be back there with like a knife and a chisel trying to figure out how to make that work. So let's go through your top voted questions over at PollGab. I forgot to hit record on the recording there. There we go. The top voted question that we have from PollGab is from MyTeaGotCold, who asks, has your opinion on lock pages and memory changed over the past 10 years? This is such a great question. Yes. I used to be totally dead set against it. And if you search for lock pages in memory on BrentOzar.com, there are a couple of blog posts where I've been like, it's a bad idea. You shouldn't be doing that. And what changed my mind was column store indexes. And it was the primary thing that changed my mind. The other thing that changed my mind was the fact that people have gotten more disciplined about only running SQL Server on the SQL Server box. Like, it's so much less common these days for people to run integration services, reporting services, analysis services, all on the same box and contact me for performance problems. These days, people are pretty good about just running the engine. I need to write a blog post about this. I need to write a blog post about how my opinion on this has changed, and it's been in my queue for quite a while. I have a little list of things. I have a big list of things that I want to blog about at some point, and that's in the list. But it's so good on you for asking and noticing them. The next, a new one came in just now. MustangKirby says, how can I check what data or pages are in cache? I woke up last night wondering if the data I'm writing takes up cache memory. This is a great question. And I always keep the 8K pages from How to Think Like the Engine here on my desk so I can explain this kind of thing. When you do an insert, update, or delete, SQL Server has to get those 8K pages up in memory in order to change them. And then it flushes those 8K pages out to disk later in an asynchronous process called a checkpoint. And the reason why SQL Server does that is that you may be making multiple changes to the same page, and it would be more efficient to just kind of pile these changes up in memory and then flush them down later. Great example, a table with an identity column starts at 1 and goes up to a bajillion. Odds are you're going to write several rows onto that page, onto the same 8K page, and then that way we can flush it down to disk later. The transaction log has to get it out to disk right away, but the data pages do not. So does the data the first part of that is the data that you're writing taking up space in memory? Yes. The second part of your question, which you wrote first, is how can you tell what pages are up in memory? There's a DMV called sysdmos buffer descriptors. The thing is, it's not necessarily designed to be queried quickly. It lets you loop through every page in the buffer pool up in memory and see which database it belongs to, which object it belongs to. Querying it takes quite a while, and while you're the more memory you have, the slower it goes. And while you're querying it, those pages are changing. So it's not really a good scientific measure. It's only a measure of one brief period of time what it looks like. But hopefully between those two, you've got your answer there. Let's see. Next up, we have DBADoug asks, why is select into faster than insert into? To learn more about that, get the Microsoft Data Loading Performance Guide. Microsoft Data Loading Performance Guide. Now, this is old. It's like 10 years old, and a lot of things have changed in there, but it'll get you a starting point as to how to load data as quickly as possible. There are trace flags that you may need. It can also impact whether you have a clustered index on the table or not. There's all kinds of cool things that affect it. It's a whole new world. Really interesting stuff. Next up, another new question. John asks, does SQL Server 2014 Plus have stored procedure execution plans by user or by SPID? No. He says, we saw one stored proc get slow for one user, but 300 milliseconds for other users. So what you want to Google for is slow in the app, fast in SSMS. Slow in the app, fast in SSMS. And it's a fantastic, big, long, epic post by Erland Summerskog. It's probably 30, 40, 50 pages long. And it goes into detail about how this happens. One of the ways that it can happen, for example, is if the users have different session options. Another way that it can happen is if they're running it from a different database using a fully qualified name. I can't even begin to do justice to the whole thing, but that post, it's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Next up, Mahmood 2. Check out the URL up on the screen. That's where we take our questions from there. Next up, we have DemandingBrentsAttention, who says, does the order of include key columns or include columns matter like it does for columns? Not at all. But I'll tell you something really interesting. Forrest, dang it, I forget his last name. Forrest Brazil? I forget Forrest's last name. But there's a blogger, and it'll be in this week's newsletter, that found out that inside the transaction log, all of your include columns are included every time you do an insert, update, or delete. Well, really, update is the one that matters, even if the data hasn't changed at all. Even if you don't change the data in include columns, the entire contents of them get written to the transaction log, which ends up slowing down availability groups, database mirroring, all kinds of stuff. It's really interesting. To learn more about that, you can either, it's going to be hard to Google given that I don't remember Forrest's last name. It's Forrest with 2 R's. But if you subscribe to my weekly newsletter, it'll be in there. That's brentozar.com/subscribe, where I put my favorite links in about databases and about stuff outside of databases every week. Next up, Newtopg says, are there any tools you recommend for SQL to Postgres migration? Nope, not even close. There are so many changes in between those two platforms that it's really hard to just forklift migrate things from one to another. I'll give you the really simplest example, dynamic SQL. If you built dynamic SQL inside of, say, stored procedures, you can't translate that from one platform to the other because it's essentially inside of comments. The string that you're building is essentially a comment as far as SQL Server is concerned. So not even close. Amazon has a product called Babelfish that's open source that aims to be a translation layer in between SQL Server and Postgres. If you want to learn more about that, go to brentozar.com and search for Babelfish. And I have a couple of blog posts on there explaining what the goals are and what I think the likelihood of success is there. Next up, we have GrumpyOldMan, who asks, I have a query that's causing a lot of blocking. SQL Server is recommending an index. The problem is that index already exists, the exact index that SQL Server is recommending, but it isn't being used. What's up with this? In my fundamentals of index tuning class, I teach you that SQL Server's index recommendations are just a comma delimited list of columns to be indexed. They are not in order. They're not in the order that the query needs them in. Just because it looks like a create index statement and it compiles doesn't mean that's the order the columns are supposed to be in. You can learn more about that in my Fundamentals of Index Tuning class, where I give you about a half-hour demo showing you the order that SQL Server actually uses and then how you can better decide what order to put them in. Next up, bamdba says PowerShell for SQL Server, question mark? Yes, period. It says, I love T-SQL, but I'm surprised by PowerShell's popularity. Am I missing automation and scripting benefits? Yeah, because T-SQL only works one server at a time. PowerShell can go across multiple servers at a time. PowerShell has all kinds of other things it can do at the file system level, like write things to files really elegantly or pull things from files really elegantly. We have a Fundamentals of PowerShell course by Drew Ferguel that gives you, for every module that he teaches you, he gives you a practical problem that you solve with PowerShell. In most cases, it's hard to solve those problems with T-SQL, which is really pretty cool. Next up, new question from Sergio says, can the tools SPBlitz and SPBlitzWho copy or capture the statements executed with SPExecute SQL? Yes. Some of the answers are short. There you go. Next up, Chris says, I recently rebuilt indexes with compression. If I take a full backup and then restore it to the new instance, will the restores databases have compression applied? Yes. The way that SQL Server backups work, it's really elegant, actually, and it's different than Postgres or MySQL. The way the SQL Server backup statements work is that they literally take the 8K pages straight out of SQL Server as is and write them to disk. Just rips through the pages at high speed with no concern as to what their contents are. So if the data is compressed on those 8K pages in your current database, they're going to be compressed over in the place wherever you restore them to. It's a very different approach than other databases, than Postgres or MySQL take. Let's see here. Next up, Chris asks another one. We have a database that is a single partition. Some of the tables specify text image on. This is stopping applying data compression. Is it needed? Okay, let's see here. So your database has a setting, and you're asking me if you need the setting. Chris, why'd you turn the setting on? How am I supposed to know if it was a good idea for you or not? It's going to be kind of hard for me there. Good luck. Next up, SickieServer says, have you ever encountered databases that where the queries are, while fixable, are so numerous that the only practical solution is for the organization to license more cores and buy more memory? Absolutely. When I do consulting with clients, I always want to give them at least 2 solutions for every problem. Now, sometimes the solutions are so obvious where I'm like, well, you could spend years rewriting the application, or you could just go throw another $50,000 worth of hardware at it and keep right on trucking as is. And the way that I usually like to frame it with companies is, let's say that you're going to spend $100,000 on more cores and more memory, and the licensing as well. Say you're going to spend $100,000 on that. That takes effect instantly. Doesn't need any testing, is pretty much guaranteed to work as long as I've looked at the server and I go, yep, more cores or more memory would make a performance improvement boost here. Whereas if I go hire a developer in order to start fixing code, that takes a long time to take effect. It may not work depending on the quality of the developer. It's a gamble. It's a risk. So it's all up to you, to the business, which one would you rather do? And when you look at like $100,000 increments, companies often think about a person being roughly $100,000 in a fully loaded salary. Then it can be very effective to just jump straight into the hardware, or as I like to say these days, throw cloud at it. Demanding Brent's attention says, glad I was able to join. Your fundamentals mastering class has been a game changer for you. You're welcome. Shane says, sometimes give the work. Do you want the option that makes you angry or makes me angry? Guess which one they usually pick. They usually pick the one that makes you angry because they don't value your time. That's usually how that works. Next up, we have Rushing Sequel, who says, Michael J. Swartz says you should totally do an Office Hours Carsini version where you have the answers before the reveal of the funny question. Michael J. Swart and I are old, so we remember this bit that Johnny Carson used to do where he would hold an envelope to his forehead, give like a one-word answer, and then open it and reveal what the question was, and everybody laughs. That's a great idea, and I love it. I'll tell you what I'm going to give a sneak preview of something that normally I wouldn't do this, but because Sword is here and he's going to get such a laugh out of it. So, Michael, do you know? It's going to be hard to see what this is. This is a cape. It's like red on the inside, black on the outside. I'm going to be wearing this cape, and I'm going to have a pair of teeth, like long dagger teeth, coming out of my mouth. And do you know what my name is going to be when I do that office hours? Let's see if anybody can figure this out. So I'm wearing a red and black cape, and I'm going to have teeth that are going to like inside fang kind of teeth. We'll see if you can figure out what my name is going to be for that office hours broadcast. Gustav says, what is your opinion of the new regex support in Azure SQL DB? I didn't even know they had it. That comes as news to me. I might have even written about that in a weekly links email. I don't even remember. I don't know if that's new or not. I vaguely remember seeing something about that. Shane says count star. It's not count star, but you're on the right track. I love where you're going with that. It's slightly different though. Lacerated digit says Count Chocula. I use Count Chocula's name all the time in demos because when I say select Count Star, I usually will put in Count and then Chocula inside of there just because I think it's funny. So Gustav says, will we see this flow down to canned SQL Server? I'll tell you what, I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me into trouble. Microsoft has been putting all kinds of stuff in Azure SQL DB lately. I say all kinds of stuff. I mean some stuff. With no apparent idea to move it down to the box product at all. It is April of 2024, almost 2 years after the announcement of SQL Server 2022. More than 2 years after the announcement of 2022. And about 2 years after the release, about a year and some months after the release, we don't even have any public word about the next version of the box product yet. Now, I am by no means saying that Microsoft is giving up on the box product. I have no reason to believe that that's true. But sure is baking for quite a while. And they haven't even fixed the headline problem in 2022 yet, which was Azure Managed Instance automatic failover or manual failover back and forth to on-premises. That's still in preview, still not even generally available yet, 2 years after the product's release. I know something's going on. Do. I'm a Potato asks a great question. What's different from Hong Kong's databases to the rest of the world? Okay, so I was going to write a blog post on this, and I should probably do that today, except my car detailer is coming in about 20 minutes, and I have to go prep the garage for him. And I can give a little spoiler there because Eve's not directly watching this yet. I have a Cadillac, just got a Cadillac Brougham, 1992 Cadillac Brougham that takes up the entire this thing is huge. It's ginormous. I love these things. They're land yachts, but it desperately needs a detailing. So I'll ask the question again. So I'm a Potato says, what's different from Hong Kong's databases to the rest of the world? So I went to Hong Kong partially for fun, but partially to go to a conference. I picked an open source database conference. It wasn't about open source necessarily, but it was about big data and AI. And I want to find out a couple things. Like, I have hardly any subscribers over in Asia. I have hardly any subscribers in Hong Kong or in China, Japan, anything like that. And I had heard rumblings of why, that they're very anti-English in terms of speaking at conferences or digesting the material. I had also heard that they're very anti-paid databases, that they're very against paying lots of money for database products. I wanted to go kind of incognito and just ask a few questions about why, about like, oh, say, does anybody here use SQL Server kind of things, or Oracle, ask questions like that. And I got really interesting answers. So in essentially, the cost of human labor is so cheap that it doesn't make sense to pay licensing for software products if you could get an open source product that does the job even 10% as well, because you just throw more human resources at solving the problem. For example, people will often say, well, SQL Server's total cost of ownership is really cheap because it does all these cool things for you, like high availability, backups are really cool, they have column store indexes, there's all these things that are really magical. Compared to other stuff like MySQL and Postgres. And so, I was talking to him about, okay, so what do you do for high availability? What do you do for backups? Things like that when people are using Postgres or MySQL. And they're like, well, we just throw a bunch of interns at it. We just hire a bunch of developers and we make them solve the problem. That's why we run, for example, I would say we as them, why they'll run Postgres and Kubernetes containers. Because they're like, well, it's really hard to administer and it takes a lot of people to do it, but who cares? The people are relatively inexpensive. When I explained that I was an American, not that it wasn't obvious, would talk about, here's, because they would say, well, how do you do it over there? And we would talk about those differences. So it was really different in the way that they approached automation. In a similar funny way, with humans being so inexpensive, there's a running joke in Silicon Valley that a lot of the products that are termed as AI, the AI doesn't refer to machine learning or anything like that. It refers to anonymous Indians. Okay, it sounds racist, but hang on, bear with me. So, for example, Amazon began yanking its personless cash register stuff out of the United States. They used to have these little convenience stores and things like that where you could just pick up things and walk out, and they would charge your credit card later based on what you had. And there are cameras everywhere, and people thought that it was machine learning, picking up which products you were doing and putting it in your pocket. What it turned out is that Amazon was employing thousands of Indian contractors who were watching the cameras and recording what you bought. And their goal was to someday move that towards automation, but in the meantime, it's just basically Mechanical Turk. Amazon's a really cool little human as a service thing. So I found that really interesting, that it really is very different than American databases or European databases. Next up, let's see, we'll do one more. We have Miles says, when I'm tuning queries, which one should I tune first? Is it high logical reads or high CPU or high duration? So what you want to do is you want to find what the SQL Server's bottleneck is. Is the bottleneck, say, CPU? Is it reading data from disk? Is it blocking? And then tune the queries involved with that bottleneck. Because otherwise, let's just say, because yesterday I was working with a client with blocking problems. Let's just say that you're having all kinds of blocking problems, but you work on the queries that are burning the most CPU. You can improve them, but no one will notice because all the blocking problems will still be there. All right, so we're coming up on an ad break, so it's probably a good time for me to ease things off here. It's always weird as a streamer. I have a couple of friends who are professional streamers. They stream for a living, and their goal is to do hours-long streams. Like they want to do 3, 5, 8-hour-long streams because they make money on the ad breaks the whole entire time that they are presenting or playing games or whatever. Whereas I got to take the opposite approach. I don't want my viewers to see ads. I'd rather not have you see any ads. So I usually, excuse me, I usually aim for 10, 15, 20-minute office hours, and that's about it. It's also nice because I can just sneak them in and answer a whole bunch of questions. So I tend to dive under the Twitch ad breaks. But so today, what am I doing today after this? So I have to get the garage ready for my car detailer. Comes in like once a month and cleans the cars, which does an amazing job, really phenomenal job. And so that I don't feel guilty not washing my cars, especially in the Vegas heat. Oh my gosh, it's hot here in Vegas. Um, and then I'm getting the house ready. Eve is coming back from China. So I came back about 2 weeks ago, and Eve is flying back starting today. Eve has an amazing journey. So Eve is stayed another couple of weeks to go to closer towards the center of China, where to go visit mom and grandma. Um, and has to get on a train from like the center of China to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Seoul, South Korea, South Korea to Vancouver, and then Vancouver to Las Vegas. All in all, it's about a 2 day journey because of plane layovers in each of the ways. So I'm going to have everything nice here at the house so that when Eve comes back, Eve doesn't have to stress out. Usually, unpacking and packing is a really big deal around here, that there's all kinds of clothes that have to be repacked and dry cleaned and all that kind of stuff. So I will go finish cleaning up the house before Eve's arrival. I hope y'all have a wonderful, what is today? Tuesday? Wednesday. Hope y'all have a wonderful Wednesday, and I'll see y'all at the next office hours. Adios.